Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where your neighbours might matter more than your own family. The year is 1879. The place is DeSmet, Dakota Territory, and on the Prairie, where survival isn't guaranteed and winter can kill you in an afternoon, a childless couple is about to prove that family isn't always about blood. You're standing on what will someday be called Main Street. Right now, it's dirt, wagon ruts, a few buildings so new the lumber still smells like sawdust and ambition. The town is barely 6 months old, maybe 20 families, maybe 30 if you count the railroad workers living in camps by Silver Lake. You can name every person here, and every single one of them is betting their life on one thing: the train. The Chicago and Northwestern Railway brought you here. It brought the nails holding your roof together, the flour in your barrel, the fabric for your daughter's dress, the kerosene that keeps your lamp burning when the sun disappears at 4 in the afternoon. Without that train, you're living in the middle of an ocean of grass with nothing but what you carried in your wagon. And out here, nothing means death. Robert Boast knows this better than most. He works for the railroad, not laying track. That work is done. He's a timekeeper, a bookkeeper, the kind of job that requires you to read and write and show up sober. His wife Ella is with him. They've been married 10 years. No children. And if you're wondering why, don't. Everyone else already is. You notice Ella first. She's standing outside the railroad housing near Silver Lake, hanging laundry on a line stretched between 2 posts. She's young, maybe early 30s. Her dress is practical, dark fabric that won't show the prairie dust, sleeves rolled to her elbows. But there's something about the way she moves. Quick, efficient. Like she's done this 1,000 times and knows exactly how long each task will take. She's humming. You can't hear the tune from here, but you can see her shoulders moving in rhythm. The wind picks up. It always does. Out here on the prairie, the wind is a living thing. It tears at your clothes, steals your breath, carries the smell of grass and distant rain, and something else you can't quite name. Loneliness, maybe, or possibility. Depends on the day. Ella finishes with the laundry and turns. She sees you watching, and instead of looking away, the way most women would, caught by a stranger's gaze, she waves. A full-armed, enthusiastic wave. Like your old friends. Like this godforsaken stretch of Dakota Territory as a neighborhood and not a survival experiment. That's when you understand something important. Ella Boast is not like the other women here. She's not worn down yet. Not quiet and cautious and conserving every ounce of energy for the next crisis. She's got light in her eyes, and in 1879 Dakota Territory, light is rarer than gold. Robert comes around the corner of the building. He's carrying a crate. Tools, probably, or supplies. He's not a big man, average height, brown hair, the kind of face you'd forget in a crowd. But he moves with purpose, sets the crate down, wipes his hands on his pants, looks at Ella, and smiles. It's not a big smile, not dramatic, just the corner of his mouth lifting. The kind of smile that says, "I see you, I'm glad you're here." The kind of smile that makes you realise this couple has something most people spend their whole lives searching for. You're about to turn away. Minding your business is a survival skill out here. When another family arrives, a wagon, 4 girls, a woman with a face that's seen too much sun and not enough rest, and a man with a beard and eyes that take in everything. Charles Ingalls, his family. They've just arrived from Minnesota, hired by the railroad, same as Robert. And right now, standing in the dirt with their wagon and their few possessions and their exhausted faces, they look like every other family that's gambled everything on free land and a fresh start. Caroline Ingalls, as the mother, looks around. You can see her doing the math. Counting buildings, counting people, figuring out if this place has a store, a doctor, a school, anything that might make this bearable. Her oldest daughter is blind. You can tell by the way she holds her mother's arm, by the way her head tilts, listening instead of looking. Her name is Mary. She's maybe 14, and out here being blind is a death sentence waiting to happen. But then Ella Boast does something unexpected. She walks over. Doesn't wait for an introduction, doesn't stand back and observe and judge the way frontier women usually do. She walks right up to Caroline Ingalls and says something. You can't hear it from here. But you see Caroline's face change. The tightness around her eyes softens. Her shoulders drop half an inch. Whatever Ella said, it was the right thing. The youngest Ingalls girl, Laura, someone will tell you later, is watching Ella with the kind of intensity only 12-year-olds possess. She's small for her age. Brown hair pulled back, dressed too short because she's growing faster than her mother can sew, and she's studying Ella Boast like Ella is a puzzle she needs to solve. Laura's used to women who are tired, women who've given up, women who do what needs doing and nothing more because there's no energy left for anything else. But Ella is different. Ella is laughing, talking with her hands, making Caroline smile. And Laura, watching this, makes a decision that will echo through the next 40 years. She wants to know this woman. She wants to understand how Ella Boast can stand in the middle of Dakota Territory, where the wind never stops, and the winter will try to kill you, and the train is the only thing connecting you to civilization, and still be joyful. Spoiler, she never figures it out, but she spends a lot of time trying. Robert and Charles shake hands, the universal language of men trying to figure out if the other is trustworthy. They talk. You can see Robert gesturing toward the railroad buildings, explaining something, offering help probably, because that's what Robert does. He helps. And just like that, without ceremony or declaration, two families become neighbours. The Ingalls family will become famous. Their story will be told in books and television shows and countless retellings. But the Boasts will be footnotes. Background characters. The people Laura mentions in passing. But here's what those books won't tell you. Here's what gets lost in the mythology of self-reliant pioneer families, conquering the wilderness through grit and determination. Robert and Ella Boast mattered more than the stories give them credit for. They mattered because they chose to matter. Because they built roads when no one asked them to. Because they planted trees that wouldn't give shade for 20 years. Because they opened their home to neighbours' children and gave away what they had, and proved that you don't need biological children to create a legacy. They just needed to show up, to care, to stay. And in 1879, on a windswept street in a town that barely existed, that's exactly what they did. You wake up on your homestead claim. It's October now. 5 months since the train brought you here, and if you thought summer was hard, you're about to learn what the Prairie really thinks of your dreams. Your house isn't finished. Of course it isn't. Nobody's house is finished. Robert Boast's claim sits on Section 7, Township 110, Range 56. That's how land works out here. Not addresses, not street names. Just numbers on a surveyor's map that tell the government you exist. His house is frame lumber. 2 rooms, maybe 3 if you count the space he'll add when winter doesn't kill him first. The walls are up. The roof keeps most of the rain out. Most. Ella is standing in what will someday be a kitchen. Right now it's a room with a stove, a table Robert built from scrap lumber, and 3 chairs that don't match because matching furniture is something you worry about when you're not worried about freezing to death. She's grinding coffee. The sound fills the space. Metal on metal. Rhythmic. Almost meditative. Listen to it. That grinding sound is the soundtrack of frontier mornings. The smell of coffee mixing with the scent of grass fire smoke from the stove. She looks up when you arrive. You've walked over from your own claim, half a mile across prairie grass so tall it brushes your waist. Your boots are wet from the dew. Your hands are cold because October mornings in Dakota Territory don't care about your comfort. But Ella smiles like you're the most important person she'll see today. "Coffee?" she asks. It's not really a question. She's already pouring. The cup is chipped. The coffee is strong enough to wake the dead. You take it. And for a moment, standing in this half-finished house on this half-claimed land, you feel something you haven't felt since leaving civilization. Welcome. Robert is outside. You can hear him talking to someone. Charles Ingalls, probably. They've been working together on a project nobody asked for and everybody needs. A road. An actual road. Not just wagon ruts that fill with mud when it rains and dust when it doesn't. A graded, maintained road that connects the homesteads to town. Here's what nobody tells you about frontier infrastructure. It doesn't build itself. The government gave you free land. That's it. Everything else, roads, wells, schools, churches, anything that makes civilization possible, you build yourself, or you do without. Robert Boast doesn't do without. He's been elected street commissioner, not because he campaigned, not because he's rich or connected or powerful, because he showed up with a shovel and started grading roads, and eventually someone said, "We should probably make this official." You walk outside. The prairie stretches in every direction. Grass, sky. The line where they meet so perfect it looks drawn. The wind carries the smell of earth and distance and something burning. Someone's fire. Or maybe the sun itself, which feels close enough to touch out here. Robert and Charles are standing near a pile of lumber. Robert's explaining something, using his hands to demonstrate. Charles is nodding. They're building something. You're not sure what until you get closer. A tree. Wait, not a tree. A hole for a tree. Robert's planting trees. Cottonwoods. Ash. Whatever he can get his hands on. Because right now, DeSmet has maybe 6 trees total. And in 20 years, when these saplings are tall enough to provide shade, someone will stand under them and never think about the man who dug holes in October because he believed in a future he might not live to see. Charles wipes his forehead. "How many are you planning to plant?" Robert shrugs. "As many as I can." It's a simple answer. But out here, simple answers are rare. Most people are too busy surviving to think about beautification, too busy twisting hay for fuel and hauling water and keeping their families alive to worry about shade trees for the next generation. But Robert's not most people. He's a man who sees past winter, past next year. He's building for people he'll never meet. And that's either incredibly optimistic or incredibly foolish, depending on whether you survive long enough to find out. Laura Ingalls is watching from the doorway. She's supposed to be helping her mother, but she's 12, and 12-year-olds would rather watch men dig holes than wash dishes. You can't blame her. Dishes are boring. The future is not. She catches you looking, doesn't look away, just stares back with those sharp brown eyes that miss nothing. There's something unsettling about being watched by a child who's already keeping score, who's already cataloguing everything she sees for some purpose you don't understand yet. Spoiler. She's going to write it all down, every detail, every person, every moment, and in 50 years people will read her books and think they understand what it was like to live here. They won't. But they'll think they do. Ella comes out. She's carrying a basket, food probably, bread, maybe some dried apples if she's got them. She walks over to where the men are working, sets the basket down and says something that makes both of them laugh. You don't hear the joke, but you see the effect. Charles's shoulders relax. Robert's grin widens. For just a moment, the work doesn't feel so heavy. That's Ella's gift. Not cooking, though she does that. Not hospitality, though she offers it freely. Her gift is making you forget, just for a few minutes, that you're living in the middle of nowhere with winter coming and no guarantee you'll see spring. Her gift is joy in a place designed to crush it. You watch her walk back to the house. Her dress is plain, patched in 2 places you can see from here. Her hair is coming loose from its pins. She's not wealthy, not refined, not the kind of woman who'd turn heads in Chicago or New York or any place with more than 50 people. But out here she's extraordinary, because out here, kindness is currency, generosity is wealth, and a woman who can make you laugh while you're digging holes for trees you'll never sit under is worth more than gold. The sun climbs higher. The morning burns away. Robert and Charles keep working. Laura keeps watching. Ella keeps moving between tasks with that efficient grace that makes hard work look easy. And you realise something that won't make sense until much later. This is community. Not the church on Sunday bake sale kind. The real kind. The kind built in moments like these. Shared coffee, shared labour, shared belief that this terrible, beautiful, impossible place might actually work if everyone just keeps showing up. But here's what you don't know yet. Here's the shadow underneath all this optimism and hard work and tree-planting hope. Ella's body is already betraying her. Something is wrong with her joints. a stiffness in her fingers, an ache in her knees. Nothing dramatic, not yet. Just the first whisper of a disease that will steal everything she is over the next decade. And when it does, Robert will face a choice. Leave her, institutionalize her, let the community absorb the burden, or stay, adapt, become something he never planned to be, a caregiver in a world that has no infrastructure for care. But that's years away. Right now, Ella is laughing, Robert is planting trees, and the prairie, indifferent and eternal, keeps blowing wind across grass that will outlive everyone standing on it. It's January now, your first winter, and if you thought you understood cold, you were wrong. Cold out here isn't a temperature, it's a living thing that wants you dead. The blizzards come every few days. The snow doesn't fall, or it attacks, horizontal, blinding. The wind screams like something wounded and furious. You can't see 3 feet in front of your face. You can't hear yourself think. And if you're caught outside, away from shelter, you have maybe 10 minutes before your body stops working. But between the blizzards, there are clear days. Days when the sun hits the snow, and the world turns so bright it hurts to look at. Days when the air is so cold it freezes the moisture in your nose, and every breath feels like inhaling knives. These are the days you venture out. Check on neighbours. Make sure everyone survived the last storm. Count the living. You're walking to the Boast place. Not because you have a reason, because on the frontier, visiting isn't optional. It's survival. You check on people, they check on you. And if someone doesn't answer their door, you break it down because frozen corpses don't knock back. The Boast house looks different than it did in October. Robert added a room, finished the walls, banked snow around the foundation for insulation. There's smoke coming from the chimney. That's the first sign of life. Smoke means fire. Fire means someone's alive inside, burning twisted hay or buffalo chips or whatever fuel they could scavenge because the coal ran out weeks ago. You knock. The door opens immediately, like Ella was waiting. Like she's been watching the approach. She pulls you inside before you can speak, slams the door behind you, and for a moment you just stand there, letting the warmth soak into your frozen face. The house is full of people, children mostly, Laura Ingalls and her sisters, the Whaley kids, a few others whose names you'll learn eventually. They're sitting on the floor, playing some game that involves string and shouting, making noise the way children do when they're not scared, when they're not cold or hungry or wondering if this winter will be the one that kills them. Ella is watching them, her face soft, content. And you understand something you didn't before. This is why they're here, why Robert and Ella Boast settled in DeSmet and built this house and planted those trees and opened their door to every child in the neighbourhood. Because they don't have their own. It's not something anyone talks about. Polite society doesn't discuss childlessness. It's shameful, pitiful. A failure of womanhood, people whisper. A curse, maybe, or just bad luck. But whatever the cause, the result is the same. Ella Boast is a woman without children in a world that measures women by how many babies they produce. So she does what women have always done when society's expectations crush them. She adapts. She redefines the terms. She becomes the neighbourhood mother, the woman whose door is always open, whose table always has room for one more, who remembers your child's birthday when you're too exhausted to remember your own name. Robert is in the corner, fixing something. A wagon wheel, looks like. One of the neighbour's kids must have broken it. He's not charging for the repair. Doesn't even mention payment, just fixes it. Because that's what Robert does. He fixes things, builds things, maintains things. The roads, the trees, the broken tools, the fractured community bonds. He's not a wealthy man, not important in any official sense. But watch how people look at him. The respect in their eyes. The way they ask his opinion before making decisions. That's real power. Not the kind that comes from land or money or political office. The kind that comes from being useful, from showing up, from caring about things that don't directly benefit you. Laura is watching Ella again. She does that a lot. Stares at people like she's memorizing them. Like someday she'll need to recreate them from words alone, and she's getting the details right now, while they're still alive and moving and real. Ella catches her looking. Smiles. "You hungry, Laura?" Laura nods. She's always hungry. 12-year-olds are bottomless pits. But out here, where food is rationed and winter is 7 months long, hunger is dangerous. It's not just discomfort. It's your body consuming itself, burning muscle for fuel, weakening you so the next illness, the next cold snap, the next crisis becomes the one that kills you. Ella brings out bread. Brown bread. Dense and gritty because it's made from wheat ground in a coffee mill, not proper flour from a proper mill. But it's food, and Laura eats it like it's a feast. Because compared to what they're eating at home, nothing but potatoes and more potatoes, this bread tastes like civilization. You watch this exchange, this tiny moment of generosity, and you multiply it. Because this isn't a one-time thing. This is what happens every week, every month, for years. The Boasts giving away what they have, feeding children, fixing tools, hosting parties, creating the social glue that holds this desperate collection of strangers together long enough to become a town. And nobody writes it down. Nobody records it. Nobody makes Ella Boast famous for the thousands of small acts of kindness that kept families functioning and children fed and neighbours connected. Because history remembers the dramatic, the exceptional, the people who did something quotable or violent or economically measurable. History doesn't remember the woman who ground extra wheat so her neighbours' children could eat bread instead of roots. The afternoon passes, the children play, the adults talk. Someone mentions the spring planting, someone else worries about seed supply. Robert offers to share his seed wheat, doesn't hesitate, doesn't negotiate, just offers, because that's what you do when everyone's survival depends on everyone else's success. Eventually people start leaving, bundling children into coats that are too thin, wrapping scarves around faces, preparing for the half-mile walk home across snow that might hide a drift deep enough to swallow you. Ella stands at the door, watching, counting, making sure everyone makes it. Because if someone doesn't reach home, she'll send Robert out to search. You're the last to leave. You turn at the door, look back. Ella is already cleaning up, sweeping crumbs, straightening chairs, moving with that efficient grace that makes hard work invisible. Robert is banking the fire, adding twisted hay, preparing for the night. And you realise this is what a marriage looks like when children aren't the centre of it. When two people have to create meaning from something other than biological reproduction. They build differently, invest differently. Their legacy isn't in the bodies they create, but in the community they nurture. The door closes behind you. The cold hits like a fist. You start walking. And as you trudge through snow that squeaks under your boots because it's too cold to be silent, you think about the Boasts, about what they're building, about whether it will last. Spoiler, it will. But not the way you think. Because what you don't know, what nobody knows yet, is that Ella's hands are getting stiffer, that the ache in her joints isn't just winter cold, that the disease already growing in her body will transform everything about their life together, will turn Robert from street commissioner to full-time caregiver, will turn Ella from neighbourhood mother to a woman who can't leave her chair. And when that happens, the community the Boasts helped build will face its first real test. Will they show up for the people who showed up for them? But that's coming. Right now, in January of 1880, Ella Boast is still standing, still laughing, still opening her door to cold children and desperate neighbours, still creating family from people who aren't related to her, by blood but are bound to her by something stronger, choice. The snow finally melts in April, not all at once, slowly, grudgingly, like the prairie itself is reluctant to let winter go. The drift shrink day by day. The frozen ground softens, and one morning you wake up and hear something you haven't heard in 7 months. Running water. Silver Lake is thawing. The ice cracks and groans and breaks apart in sheets that look like broken glass floating on dark water. The sound carries across the prairie. A grinding, snapping symphony that means you survived. You made it. Another winter down, and you're still breathing. Robert Boast is standing in his yard with a shovel, not digging, just holding it, looking at the mud where snow used to be, calculating, planning, because spring on the frontier isn't rest. It's the starting gun for a race against next winter. You walk over. Your boots sink into mud that sucks at your heels with every step. The air smells like wet earth and melting ice, and possibility. Robert sees you coming, nods. Doesn't waste words on greetings. Out here, showing up is greeting enough. Road's a mess, he says. You look at Main Street. He's right. It's not a road anymore. It's a river of mud 2 feet deep in places, wagon ruts filled with water. The winter freeze-thaw cycle has destroyed whatever grading existed last fall. Right now, Main Street is impassable. And if the supply wagons can't get through, if the mail can't reach town, if people can't move between their homesteads and the store, then DeSmet might as well not exist. Robert plants his shovel. Gonna fix it. It's not a question, not a request for help, just a statement of fact. Robert Boast is going to fix the road, because somebody has to, and Robert has never waited for somebody else to volunteer. By afternoon, 6 men are working. Robert organised them without organising them. He just started digging, grading, clearing drainage, and one by one, men saw what he was doing and picked up shovels. Charles Ingalls, the Wilder boy, Cap Garland. Others whose names history won't remember, but whose backs bent and whose hands blistered, and whose labour built the infrastructure that made civilization possible. This is what Street Commissioner means in 1880 Dakota Territory. No budget, no crew, no equipment except what you own or can borrow. Just you and a shovel and the belief that roads matter, that drainage matters, that the difference between a town and a collection of shacks is someone willing to do the work nobody asked for. You watch Robert measure grades with string and stakes. He's not guessing. He's calculating slope and drainage and how water flows. Where did he learn this? Railroad work, probably. You don't keep books for a railway company without learning how engineering works, how grades matter, how small differences in elevation determine whether water drains or pools and freezes and destroys your road come winter. Ella brings food at noon. She's moving slower than last year. You notice it. Everyone notices it, but nobody mentions it. Her hands fumble with the basket handle. She winces when she bends, but her smile is the same, bright, genuine, the kind of smile that makes mud and exhaustion feel temporary. You boys are going to work yourselves to death, she says. Robert looks up, grins. Better than sitting inside thinking about it, she laughs, sets down the basket, bread and dried apples and something that might be cheese if you're optimistic. The men eat standing up because sitting down in mud this deep means you're not getting up without help. They eat fast, grateful. And then they go back to work because daylight is burning and roads don't grade themselves. Laura Ingalls is watching from a distance. She's 13 now, old enough to notice things adults try to hide. Old enough to see the way Ella's hands shake when she pours water, the way Robert watches his wife when she's not looking, the worry in his eyes that wasn't there last year. But spring is good at hiding problems. Everything's growing. The grass shoots up 3 inches overnight. Wildflowers explode across the prairie in waves of colour that make you forget winter ever happened. The birds come back, the air warms, and for a few weeks, Dakota Territory feels like the promised land they advertised in the railroad brochures. Robert starts planting trees, not on his own property, on Main Street, public spaces, the schoolyard. Anywhere that will matter in 20 years when these saplings are tall enough to provide shade for people he'll never meet. He orders them from a nursery downstate. Cottonwoods, ash, box elder. Trees that can survive prairie wind and brutal winters and soil that's more sand than earth. He pays for them himself. Nobody asked him to. Nobody's reimbursing him. He's just a man spending his own money on trees for a future he hopes exists. You help him plant one. The hole is deeper than you expected. 3 feet, Robert insists. Roots need room, he says. Need to get below the frost line or winter will kill them. You lower the sapling into the hole. It's maybe 4 feet tall. A stick, basically. Looks ridiculous surrounded by prairie that stretches to infinity. Looks temporary. Doomed. Like planting hope in a place designed to crush it. Robert packs soil around the roots, waters it from a bucket hauled from the well, steps back, studies his work with the same intensity he studies road grades, making sure it's right, making sure it has a chance. Think it'll make it? You ask. He shrugs. Some will, some won't, but the ones that make it will matter. And that's Robert Boast in one sentence. Practical, patient, willing to invest in outcomes he won't live to see because the alternative is admitting that nothing you do matters, that your labour is temporary, that when you die, the prairie will erase every trace you existed. But Robert refuses to believe that, so he plants trees, grades roads, fixes wagon wheels, builds infrastructure one shovel of dirt at a time, and slowly, so slowly you don't notice until years later, DeSmet's stops being a collection of desperate families and starts being a town. Summer comes, the wheat grows, and suddenly everyone in DeSmet is doing the same math. Will there be enough? You're standing in Robert's wheat field. It's not large, maybe 40 acres planted. The stalks are waist high, golden, bending in the wind like a sea that never stops moving. The heads are heavy with grain. This is a good crop, maybe the best anyone's seen in Dakota Territory, and Robert is about to give half of it away. Not sell. Give. Here's how seed wheat works on the frontier. You plant wheat, you harvest wheat. You keep enough seed for next year's planting, you sell the rest. That sale is your income, your survival money, the difference between making it through winter and starving. So when someone asks to borrow seed wheat, they're not asking for a favour, they're asking you to risk your own future for theirs. Robert says yes anyway. The Whaley family needs seed. Their crop failed last year. Hail destroyed it 3 weeks before harvest. They've got nothing to plant, nothing to sell, and if they don't plant this spring, they'll have nothing to harvest next fall, which means they're done, finished. They'll abandon their claim and head back east with their tails between their legs, joining the 50% of homesteaders who give up before proving their land. Neva Whaley is 11, too young to understand bankruptcy, but old enough to know her family's in trouble. She watches her father ask Robert for help, watches him explain their situation with the kind of humiliation that comes from needing charity. Watches Robert not even hesitate. How much do you need? Robert asks. Her father calculates. 40 bushels, maybe 50. That's half of Robert's seed supply, half of what he needs to plant his own field next year. But Robert just nods. Come get it Saturday. No contract, no interest, no collateral. Just a handshake and the understanding that if the Whaley's crop comes in, they'll pay him back, and if it doesn't, they won't. And either way, Robert will manage. You're watching this transaction, trying to understand it, because this is the opposite of every economic principle you've ever learned. You don't give away capital. You don't risk your own survival for someone else's. You protect what's yours. That's how you survive. But Robert operates on different math. His equation includes variables you can't measure: trust, reputation, community cohesion. The understanding that a town of 50 families only works if all 50 families survive. If even 5 families fail and leave, the whole system weakens. Fewer people to share labour, fewer customers for the store, fewer hands when harvest comes, and you need help bringing in your crop before the hail destroys it. So giving away seed wheat isn't charity, it's investment. Survival mathematics on a scale bigger than one family. Saturday comes. The Whaleys arrive with a wagon. Robert has the wheat sacked and waiting. 50 bushels, weighed and measured. His entire surplus. He loads it himself. Doesn't make them do the heavy work, doesn't mention payment. Just loads the sacks and ties them down and wishes them luck. Never will remember this her entire life. 60 years later, she'll tell an interviewer about the man who saved her family with seed wheat and a coffee mill, who kept them from losing everything, who never asked for anything in return except that they stay, that they keep trying. The coffee mill is next, because seed wheat is useless if you can't grind it into flour. And the Whaley's mill broke last winter. The handle snapped, the grinding mechanism seized. They've been eating boiled wheat kernels for months, whole kernels soaked in water until they're soft enough to chew. It's not food, it's survival fuel, and it tastes like giving up. Ella brings them the mill, not Robert. Ella. She walks it over herself, a mile across prairie grass, carrying a heavy iron mill that makes her hands ache and her joints scream. But she does it, because that's what neighbours do. Mrs. Whaley takes the mill, starts to thank her. But Ella waves it off. Bring it back when you're done, or don't. We'll manage either way. This is how frontier economies work, not with money, with objects that circulate through the community based on need. The coffee mill lives at the Whaley's house for 3 months, then someone else needs it, then someone else. It passes from house to house like currency, and everyone understands you borrow what you need, you return it when you can. And if you can't return it, that's okay too, because next winter you might be the one who needs something you can't afford to replace, but there's a cost to all this generosity. A cost Robert and Ella pay in ways nobody tallies. Their own wheat crop is smaller this year, because Robert gave away seed. Their own supplies run tighter, because Ella keeps giving away food. And slowly, quietly, their savings disappear, not into waste, into the community, into keeping other families alive long enough to become stable, into building the social infrastructure that makes DeSmet function. You watch Robert at the store in August. He's buying supplies, flour, sugar, kerosene, the same things everyone buys. But when the merchant tallies the bill, Robert hesitates, just for a second. You see him calculate, see him decide which items he can do without. He puts back the sugar. Don't need it, he says, but you were at his house last week. You saw Ella making bread without sugar, without salt, without anything that costs money, because they gave their money away. They gave it in the form of seed wheat and borrowed tools and meals for neighbours' children, and now they're rationing themselves so others don't have to. Nobody notices. Nobody keeps score. Because if people knew how much Robert and Ella were sacrificing, they'd feel guilty. They'd stop accepting help. And then the whole system collapses. So the Boasts stay quiet. They absorb the cost. They smile and say they're fine and keep opening their door to hungry children and families who need seed wheat and neighbours who need a coffee mill. And Ella's hands keep getting stiffer. The pain in her joints keeps spreading, from her fingers to her wrists to her elbows to her shoulders. She hides it, moves carefully, doesn't complain, because complaining means admitting weakness. And weakness means losing your place in the community, means becoming a burden, and Ella would rather die than burden anyone. But Robert sees. He watches her struggle with buttons, with lifting the water bucket, with kneading bread. He sees the way she favours her left side, the way she sits down more often, the way she catches her breath after simple tasks that used to be effortless. And he doesn't say anything, because what would he say? There's no doctor, no treatment, no cure for whatever is slowly stealing his wife's mobility. There's only adaptation, adjustment, the silent recalculation of what their life will look like if Ella can't move the way she used to. But that's coming. Right now, in the summer of 1881, Ella is still standing, still walking over to neighbours' houses with borrowed coffee mills, still hosting children, still pretending everything is fine, and Robert is planting more trees, because if he stops building for the future, he'll have to confront the present, and the present is starting to look like a problem he doesn't know how to solve. It's 1889. A decade has passed, and if you stood on Main Street in 1879 and then stood here today, you wouldn't recognise the place. The dirt road Robert graded with 6 men and borrowed shovels is now an actual street, maintained, drained, passable even after heavy rain. The wagon ruts don't fill with mud anymore. The water flows into ditches Robert dug by hand, ditches that channel runoff away from buildings and into the prairie where it belongs. It's not fancy, it's not paved, but it works. And that's the difference between a town that survives and a town that drowns in its own mud every spring. The trees are taller now, still young, still thin, but tall enough that you can stand under them and feel the beginning of shade. In 10 more years, they'll be substantial. In 20, they'll define Main Street. Children will climb them. Lovers will carve initials in the bark. People will sit under them on hot summer days and never think about the man who dug holes in 1880 because he believed those days would come. But Robert's not thinking about 20 years from now. He's thinking about today, about the fact that Ella couldn't get out of bed this morning without his help, about the way her hands are curled now, permanently, the fingers bent at angles that don't straighten. The knuckles swollen to twice their normal size. Rheumatoid arthritis. That's what the doctor called it when Robert finally took her downstate to see someone who might know what was wrong. The doctor was honest. There's no cure. It will get worse. Eventually she won't be able to walk. Robert asked how long. The doctor shrugged. Could be 5 years. Could be 2. Bodies are different. That was 1887, 2 years ago. And the doctor was right. It's getting worse. You see Robert in town more often now, running errands that Ella used to handle, buying supplies, picking up mail. He's added shopping to his list of responsibilities, along with cooking, cleaning, helping Ella dress, undress, bathe, all the intimate, exhausting labour that comes with caring for someone whose body is betraying them one joint at a time. He doesn't complain, doesn't mention it. If you ask how Ella is, he says, "She's fine," and then he changes the subject. Because what's the alternative? Admit that his wife is becoming disabled in a world with no infrastructure for disability? That their life savings are disappearing into medical consultations that offer no solutions? That he's terrified of what comes next? So he keeps working, keeps showing up, keeps maintaining roads and planting trees and fixing neighbours' tools, because stopping would mean confronting the reality that everything he built is about to change. The children still visit, not as often. They're older now. Laura Ingalls is 22, married, starting her own life. The Whaley kids are teenagers, too old for the parties that used to fill the Boast house with noise and laughter, but they remember. They remember the woman who fed them when they were hungry, who loaned them a coffee mill that kept their family from starving, who made them feel welcome in a place where welcome was the difference between belonging and isolation. Never Whaley comes by sometimes, brings eggs or bread. Small offerings that don't quite balance the scales but acknowledge the debt. She sits with Ella, talks to her, tells her about school, about boys, about all the normal things teenage girls worry about. And Ella listens, smiles, asks questions, pretends her hands don't hurt, pretends she's not wondering how much longer she can hold a conversation before exhaustion swallows her whole. Robert watches these visits from across the room, sees how much effort Ella puts into appearing normal, into being the woman everyone remembers, and he loves her for it. Loves her for refusing to disappear, for fighting to stay present even as her body systematically shuts down. But there's rage underneath the love, rage at the unfairness of it, at the fact that Ella spent 10 years giving everything away, and now she's the one who needs help and there's no system to provide it. No nurses, no home care, no disability benefits, just Robert. Just him and his increasingly limited capacity to do everything himself. The town doesn't understand the weight he's carrying. They see Robert Boast, dependable, steady, the street commissioner who never missed a day, the man who plants trees and grades roads and shows up when you need him. They don't see the man who hasn't slept through the night in 2 years because Ella wakes up in pain and needs repositioning, needs water, needs reassurance that she's not a burden even though both of them know she is, not a burden because she's lazy or selfish, a burden because disability in 1889 is unsupported. There are no ramps, no wheelchairs you can afford without being wealthy, no social services, no meals on wheels, no respite care. Just you and your family absorbing the full cost of a body that stopped cooperating. And the cost is devastating. Robert's own health is declining. He's 51. Not old by modern standards, but ancient for a frontier man who spent 30 years doing manual labour. His back hurts. His joints ache. He's slowing down. And he can feel time running out. Can feel the gap narrowing between his ability to care for Ella and her need for care. You see him standing in his yard one evening, looking at the trees he planted. They're maybe 15 feet tall now, thin but alive. Survivors. He's watering one, carrying buckets from the well because irrigation systems don't exist and trees don't water themselves. His movements are slow, deliberate, the movements of a man rationing energy because there's never enough. He sets the bucket down, leans against the tree, just for a moment, just long enough to catch his breath, and in that moment you see everything he's lost, the future he imagined, The partnership he expected. The shared old age that's been replaced by caretaking and exhaustion and the slow erosion of hope. But then he picks up the bucket, waters the next tree, keeps going. Because that's what Robert Boast does. He keeps going, even when going is impossible. Even when everything he built is crumbling under the weight of one woman's illness and one man's inability to carry it all alone. Inside the house, Ella is sitting in a chair. Not by choice. She can't stand anymore. Not for long. Her legs still work, but the pain is too much. The joints in her ankles and knees feel like broken glass grinding together. So she sits and watches through the window as her husband waters trees that won't give shade for another decade. And she understands something that breaks her heart. Robert is planting those trees because he needs to believe in a future. Because if he stops building for tomorrow, he'll have to admit that today is unbearable. So she lets him plant, lets him hope. Lets him pretend that infrastructure and trees and community service will somehow make up for the fact that the woman he married is disappearing into a body that won't cooperate. That love isn't enough to fix this. That all the generosity they poured into DeSmet won't be returned in the form they need most. Because the community can't give them back Ella's mobility, can't give them back the partnership they lost, can't give Robert the rest he desperately needs. All they can offer is memory, gratitude, the promise that when Robert and Ella are gone, people will remember what they did. The roads, the trees, the seed wheat, the coffee mill, the open door. But memory doesn't help when you're 51 and exhausted and watching your wife suffer, and there's no end in sight except the one you don't want to think about. It's August, 1890, and Robert is loading a wagon for a trip that everyone knows won't work but nobody can admit is pointless. Hot Springs, that's the destination, 300 miles south, a place where people go when doctors can't help them, when medicine runs out of answers, when the only option left is hope disguised as sulphur water and desperate prayer. The newspapers advertise it. Miraculous cures for rheumatism and joint ailments. Restore your health in the healing waters. The ads show smiling people emerging from springs, their pain magically erased. What they don't show is the hundreds who go home unchanged, still broken, still in pain, still counting the money they wasted on magic that doesn't exist. But Robert doesn't have a choice. He has to try. Because the alternative is admitting that Ella's condition is permanent. That the woman who walked a mile carrying a coffee mill 5 years ago will never walk that far again. That her hands will never straighten. That the rest of her life will be spent sitting, waiting, slowly losing pieces of herself until there's nothing left but memory and pain. You're standing in their yard as Robert checks the wagon straps. The journey will take a week each way. 2 weeks at the springs. A month total. A month away from the homestead. From the roads he maintains. From the town that depends on him showing up. Ella is already in the wagon. Sitting on blankets Robert arranged to cushion the jolts. She's 42 years old. She looks 60. The pain has aged her in ways sunlight and hard work never did. Her face is drawn. Her eyes are tired, but when she sees you watching, she smiles. That same bright smile she gave you 11 years ago when you first met. The smile that says, "I'm fine. Don't worry. Everything's fine. It's a lie." You both know it's a lie. But out here, lying is kindness. Telling the truth, that you're terrified, that you're in constant pain, that you're becoming a burden, helps nobody. So you lie. You smile, you pretend. Robert climbs up beside her, takes the reins, looks back at the house they built together, the homestead they proved up, the land they transformed from prairie grass into something that produced wheat and hope and a reason to stay. He doesn't say goodbye to you, just nods. The wagon rolls forward. Ella doesn't look back, can't look back. Her neck doesn't turn that way anymore. The arthritis has reached her spine. Every movement is calculated now, every turn of the head, every shift of weight. Her body is a minefield of pain, and she's learned which movements trigger explosions. The wagon disappears into the prairie, and you're left standing there wondering if they'll come back better or just more broken. Spoiler, they come back more broken, not physically. Ella's condition doesn't worsen during the trip, but something else breaks. The hope breaks. The belief that maybe, somehow, there's a solution. That modern medicine or ancient spring water or divine intervention might reverse what's happening. The springs don't work. Of course they don't. Rheumatoid arthritis isn't cured by hot water and sulphur. It's an autoimmune disease. Her body's attacking itself, and no amount of bathing or praying or wishing will stop that attack. The doctors at hot springs are honest, at least. We can make you comfortable, but we can't make you better. Comfortable means opium, laudanum, the legal, socially acceptable way to numb pain in 1890. Ella tries it. It helps. The pain recedes to a distant roar instead of a constant scream. But it also makes her foggy, disconnected. She hates it. Hates the way it steals her sharpness, her ability to track conversations, to be present. So she stops taking it, chooses pain over absence, chooses to feel everything rather than feel nothing. It's a terrible choice, but it's hers. They come home in September. The wheat is ready for harvest. Robert should be in the fields, should be bringing in the crop that will pay for the spring planting. Instead, he's helping Ella down from the wagon, carrying her into the house, settling her into the chair that's become her permanent residence. The harvest waits. Robert hires help, pays neighbours to bring in his wheat while he stays with Ella. It costs him not just money, pride, independence. The fiction that he can handle everything himself. He can't handle everything himself, nobody can. But admitting that means admitting weakness. And weakness on the frontier is dangerous. It makes you vulnerable, makes people wonder if you're going to make it, if your land will be available soon, if your failure is an opportunity for someone else's expansion. So Robert keeps pretending, keeps showing up in town, keeps maintaining the roads even though he's running on 3 hours of sleep and exhaustion that never ends, keeps smiling when people ask about Ella, keeps lying the way Ella taught him, with a bright smile and a firm voice that says everything's fine. But at night, when the town is asleep and the prairie is dark and there's nobody watching, he sits beside Ella's chair and holds her twisted hands and lets himself feel the weight of it all. The unfairness, the rage, the grief for the life they were supposed to have. And Ella holds his hand back, as much as she can. Her fingers don't curl the way they used to, can't grip with strength. But she holds on, reminds him that she's still here, still fighting, still refusing to disappear even as her body systematically erases her ability to exist in the world the way she used to. Listen to the silence in that room, the absence of children they never had, the absence of family who might help carry this burden. The absence of any system, medical, social, governmental, that might make this bearable. It's just them. Two people who built a community through generosity and labour and open doors, and now they need that community to give back. But the community doesn't know how. Because frontier towns aren't built for disability. They're built for productivity, for able bodies doing hard labour, for people who can contribute more than they consume. And Ella, sitting in that chair, unable to walk or cook or clean or do any of the things that define women's value in 1890, is starting to feel like a person who consumes more than she contributes. She's wrong, but she doesn't know that yet. By 1893, Ella can't stand without help, can't walk more than a few steps before her legs give out. The arthritis has destroyed her knees, her ankles, the small bones in her feet. Walking feels like stepping on broken glass with every movement, so she stops walking. Robert brings home a wheelchair, not new. He can't afford new. He borrowed it from a family downstate whose grandmother died and left equipment nobody needed anymore. It's wooden, heavy. The wheels squeak. The seat is hard. But it moves. And movement, even limited movement, is better than being trapped in one chair in one room watching the world continue without you. You see Ella in that wheelchair for the first time on a Sunday. Robert is pushing her to church. It's 3 blocks, a distance she used to walk without thinking. Now it requires planning. effort. Robert lifting her from the house chair to the wheelchair, wrapping blankets around her legs because she can't regulate her temperature anymore. The arthritis has disrupted something in her body's ability to stay warm. People stare. They don't mean to be rude, but a wheelchair in DeSmet in 1893 is rare, unusual, a visible mark of brokenness that makes everyone uncomfortable. Because if Ella Boast, strong, generous, merry Ella, can end up in a wheelchair, then anyone can, and nobody wants to think about that. The church has steps, 4 of them. Robert carries her up, lifts her out of the wheelchair, cradles her like a child, carries her into the building while someone else, you, maybe, carries the wheelchair. Inside, he settles her into a pew, arranges her carefully, makes sure she's comfortable, then sits beside her like nothing unusual just happened. But it is unusual, and everyone in that church knows it. They see what Robert's life has become. They see the exhaustion in his face, the way his hands shake slightly from the strain of lifting and carrying and doing everything. They see Ella's twisted hands folded in her lap, her legs covered by a blanket even though it's summer, her smile that's a little too bright, a little too insistent that she's fine. After the service, people approach carefully, like approaching a wounded animal. They don't know what to say. "How are you feeling, Ella?" is too direct, too cruel, because the answer is obvious. She's not feeling well, she's never going to feel well again. So they say nothing, or they say something worse. "You look good." It's a lie. Everyone knows it's a lie. But what else can you say? The truth, that Ella looks like she's dying by inches, helps nobody. Laura Ingalls Wilder stops by. She's married now, has a daughter, Rose. She brings the girl to visit. Rose is small, maybe 3 years old. She stares at Ella with the brutal honesty only children possess. Points at the wheelchair, asks, "Why can't she walk?" Laura hushes her, embarrassed. But Ella laughs, actually laughs. "Because my legs forgot how, sweetheart." It's a better answer than any adult could give. Simple, true, not drowning in pity or false hope. Rose accepts it, moves on, starts playing with a doll on the floor near Ella's chair, and for a moment the house feels like it used to, full of children and noise and life. But the moment doesn't last. Laura leaves, takes Rose with her, and the silence rushes back in. The absence of all those neighbourhood children who used to fill this house. They've grown up, moved on, started their own lives, and Ella, trapped in her chair, watches those lives continue from a distance. The homestead is too much work now. Robert can't maintain it and care for Ella, can't harvest crops and cook meals and help her dress and undress and bathe and use the toilet. Can't do everything. Nobody can. So in 1895 they sell. Not the land, they keep the claim, but they rent out the farming to a neighbour, move into a smaller house in town, closer to the store, closer to the doctor, not that doctors help, closer to other people, not that other people know what to do. The townhouse is smaller, 1 story, easier to navigate with a wheelchair. Robert builds a ramp. It's crude, just boards nailed together at an angle. But it works. Ella can be wheeled outside without being carried down steps. She can sit on the porch and watch the street, watch people go by, wave to neighbours who wave back and then hurry along because stopping to talk means confronting the uncomfortable reality of disability. You walk past that house one afternoon. Ella is on the porch, sitting in her wheelchair, a blanket over her legs even though it's July. She sees you, waves. You wave back, and then you face a choice that everyone in DeSmet faces dozens of times. Do you stop? Do you climb those porch steps and sit with her and make conversation even though you don't know what to say? Or do you keep walking? Pretend you're in a hurry. Pretend you didn't see the loneliness in her face, the desperate hope that someone, anyone, will break the isolation that's become her life. Most people keep walking, not because they're cruel, because they don't know how to help. Because disability in 1895 is a private family matter, not a community responsibility. You care for your own, you suffer quietly, and everyone else pretends not to notice. But some people stop. Neva Whaley, now grown, stops, sits with Ella, brings gossip, news, details about who's courting whom, who had a baby, who sold their claim, and moved back east. Normal things. The currency of community that Ella no longer has access to because she can't move through town gathering information herself. Robert is inside. You can hear him, washing dishes, sweeping floors, doing the domestic labour that used to be Ella's domain. He's not good at it. The house isn't as clean as it used to be. The meals aren't as well prepared, but he's trying, and trying counts for something. At night, he lifts Ella from the wheelchair to the bed. It's gotten harder. She's not heavy. The illness has stolen her weight along with everything else, but his back is failing. His strength is diminishing, and the math is becoming clear. Soon, he won't be able to lift her. And then what? There are no nursing homes, no home health aides, no Medicare or Medicaid or any system designed to help families manage long-term disability. There's only you, your endurance, your willingness to sacrifice everything: sleep, health, social life, economic stability, to care for someone whose body stopped cooperating. Robert is 57. He should be planning retirement, easing into old age, letting the younger generation take over the heavy work. Instead, he's doing more work than ever. Physical work, emotional work. The invisible labour of caregiving that society doesn't count or compensate or even acknowledge. And Ella is 46. She should be entering her prime. The years when the children are grown and the work is lighter, and you finally have time to enjoy the life you built. Instead, she's trapped. Her mind is sharp, her spirit unbroken, but her body is a cage she can't escape. Listen to the sound of Robert's footsteps, the way they're slower now, heavier, each step weighted with exhaustion that never ends. Listen to the silence in the house, the absence of laughter, of parties, of the merry, generous woman who used to fill this space with light. She's still here, but the world has shrunk around her, reduced to one chair, one room, one window looking out at a life she can no longer participate in. And the community that she helped build, that she fed and loaned coffee mills to and hosted parties for, doesn't know how to give back what she needs most. Not food, not tools, not charity, just presence, just someone willing to sit with her, to see her, to remind her that she still matters even though her body stopped working. Some people do, but not enough. And the isolation grows, week by week, month by month, year by year, until Ella Boast becomes a memory, a story people tell. Remember when the Boasts used to host those parties? Remember when Ella was so merry? Remember when... But she's not a memory yet. She's still here, still sitting on that porch, still waving at neighbours, still hoping someone will stop. It's 1898. Almost 20 years since Robert and Ella arrived in DeSmet with a railroad job and dreams of free land. And if you asked them back then what their life would look like at 50, they wouldn't have described this. Robert's in the kitchen at dawn, making coffee. Not for himself, for Ella. Because she can't hold a cup anymore. Her hands don't work that way. So he makes it. Lets it cool. Then sits beside her chair and holds the cup to her lips while she drinks. Small sips, careful. Because if she spills, she can't wipe it away. Can't clean herself. Depends entirely on him for everything. This is intimacy. Not the kind anyone talks about. Not the kind that appears in novels or poetry. The kind that's built in bathrooms and bedrooms and early mornings when nobody's watching. The kind where you wash your wife's body because she can't reach her own back. Where you comb her hair because her hands can't grip the brush. Where you help her with the toilet because dignity is a luxury disabled bodies can't afford. Robert does all of it, without complaint, without resentment. Or if there's resentment, and how could there not be? He hides it so well even Ella can't see it. And she's looking for it, searching his face every day for signs that he's tired of this, that he wishes he'd married someone else, someone whose body kept its promises. But he doesn't leave, doesn't put her in an institution, Not that there are many options, even if he wanted to. Doesn't drink himself to death the way some frontier men do when life becomes unbearable. He just stays, shows up, does the work, day after day after day, until staying becomes its own form of heroism. You see them on the porch sometimes. Robert sitting beside Ella's wheelchair, not talking, just sitting, watching the street, watching the trees he planted almost 20 years ago. They're tall now, substantial. Their branches create real shade. Children climb them, lovers sit under them, and nobody thinks about the man who dug holes in frozen ground because he believed in futures he wouldn't live to see. But Robert thinks about it. Thinks about all the things he built that outlasted him. The roads, the trees, the infrastructure that made DeSmet function. And he wonders if any of it matters. If anything matters when the person you love most is slowly disappearing, and there's nothing you can build or fix or grade that will stop it. Ella reaches for his hand. Her fingers don't close properly, can't grip. But she touches him, and that touch says everything words can't. Thank you. I'm sorry. I love you. Don't give up. He doesn't give up. The town keeps changing. New families arrive. Young families who don't remember Ella walking, who never attended parties at the Boast homestead, who only know her as the woman in the wheelchair on the porch, the disabled woman whose husband does everything. These new families don't understand what Robert and Ella gave, don't know about the seed wheat or the coffee mill or the years of generosity that kept neighbours alive. They see an old man caring for an invalid wife, and they feel pity, maybe respect for his dedication, but not gratitude, because they weren't there, weren't saved by what the Boast offered. But the old families remember. The ones who survived because Robert loaned seed wheat, because Ella fed their children, because the Boast showed up when nobody else did. These families bring food sometimes, offer to sit with Ella so Robert can rest, small gestures that acknowledge the debt. Neva Whaley Harding, married now with children of her own, brings her kids to visit. She tells them, "This is Mrs. Boast. When I was your age, she saved my family." And the children stare at Ella with confusion because how could this woman in a wheelchair save anyone? But Neva knows, and she makes sure her children know. Makes sure the story gets passed down, because some debts can't be repaid, can only be remembered. On bad days, and there are many bad days, Ella can't hide the pain. It shows in her face, the way her jaw clenches, the way her breathing gets shallow, the way her eyes lose focus because concentrating through agony is impossible. Robert sees it, offers laudanum. She refuses. She's refused for 8 years, refuses to trade awareness for numbness. So he sits with her through the pain, holds her hand, talks to her about nothing, about the weather, about who walked past the house, about the trees and the roads and the town they helped build. Distraction instead of medication, presence instead of solution, because there is no solution, only endurance. The seasons cycle, winter comes, spring follows, the wheat grows and gets harvested, the trees bloom and lose their leaves, and through it all, Robert and Ella remain. Stationary, a fixed point while the world moves around them. Robert is aging faster now, you can see it, the way he struggles to lift Ella from chair to bed, the way his hands shake, the way he catches his breath after simple tasks. He's 60. His body's breaking under the weight of years and labour and the constant physical demands of caregiving. And Ella sees it, watches her husband destroy himself to keep her comfortable, and there's nothing she can do, can't take the burden from him, can't ease his work, can only watch and feel the guilt that comes from needing more than you can give back. But here's what she doesn't understand. Robert doesn't keep score, doesn't tally what he's given versus what he's received, doesn't measure love in transactions. He stays because staying is what love looks like when everything else, health, youth, dreams, futures, is gone. One evening you walk past their house. The lamps are lit inside. Through the window you see Robert reading to Ella. His voice is low, steady, you can't hear the words, but you see her face, the way she's listening, the way her expression softens, the way for just a moment the pain recedes and she's present, fully there, connected to her husband and the story and the life they still share, even though it looks nothing like what they planned. And you understand something that will stay with you forever. This is what community is built on. Not just the dramatic gestures, not just the seed wheat and coffee mills and tree planting, but this, the quiet, invisible labour of showing up, of staying, of loving someone through the worst thing that can happen, and never once suggesting they're not worth it. Robert and Ella Boast are teaching DeSmet what marriage means, what community means, what it looks like to invest everything in someone else's survival. And someday, not today, but someday, the town will understand what they witnessed, what these two people gave, what they proved about human capacity for endurance and love and sacrifice. But that understanding comes later. Right now, in 1898, they're just two people in a small house on a quiet street, aging, struggling, surviving, together. The 1900s arrive like any other year, and then they keep arriving, over and over, the same routines, the same rooms, the same two people doing the same things until the days blur into each other, and you can't remember if it was Tuesday or a year ago. This is what nobody tells you about caregiving. Not the dramatic moments, not the crises that force decisions, but the relentless sameness, the repetition that wears you down more than any crisis ever could. Robert's alarm goes off at 5. Every morning, 52 years old now. His body is a collection of aches that never stop. His back is permanently curved from lifting. His knees don't work the way they used to. His hands shake from exhaustion that never ends. But 5 comes every day, and 5 means he has to get up. Ella is sleeping, or lying awake in the dark. He can't always tell anymore. She doesn't move. Her body has become so small, so fragile, that sometimes he holds his hand in front of her mouth to make sure she's still breathing, that the night didn't steal her while he wasn't paying attention. It does this to you. Caregiving. Makes you afraid of sleep because sleep means you're not watching, not protecting, not available for the crisis that could come at 3 a.m. He helps her to the toilet. This is the first task, every morning. She can't walk there, can't balance without help, so he carries her, or helps her shuffle a few feet that take minutes and require all the strength he can muster. Then he waits outside the door, ready, in case she falls, in case she needs him immediately. The indignity of it is corrosive, for both of them. Ella hates needing help with something so private, hates that her husband has to assist her with the most basic biological functions, hates that her body has betrayed her so completely that there's no alternative. Robert hates it too, not because it's disgusting or awkward, because it's a constant reminder that his wife, the woman he married almost 40 years ago, is disappearing, that every day strips away another piece of her dignity, another piece of her independence, another reason to believe that things might get better. After the toilet, there's breakfast, coffee, toast if there's bread, eggs if the hens cooperated yesterday. She can barely eat anymore. Her jaw doesn't work right. The arthritis has destroyed her ability to chew. So food has to be soft, easy to swallow, which means a lot of bread soaked in broth, a lot of soup, a lot of things that taste like nothing. She loses weight, year by year, her body consuming itself. Because disability in 1900 doesn't come with nutritional support. It comes with what you can afford and what you can prepare and what her body can process. You see Robert walking to the store less frequently now, not because he doesn't need supplies, because supplies cost money, and money is becoming scarce. The street commissioner position comes with a small stipend. Not much, enough to keep them fed, enough to pay rent on the small house, not enough for medical care or extra food or the luxuries that might make Ella's life more bearable, and his railroad pension, the wages he earned 30 years ago that were supposed to secure his retirement, isn't enough to fill the gap. So Robert does something he never did before. He works, not formal work, odd jobs, repairs, things he always did for free because community service was its own reward. Now he does them for money, because money is survival, because Ella needs him to choose between his principles and her comfort. He makes different choices now. A neighbour needs fence repair. Robert does it. Gets paid. The money goes into a jar for medicine, for special food, for the things they can't afford otherwise. Another neighbour needs carpentry work. Robert does it. His hands shake, his joints hurt, but he does it. Because there's no alternative. Because giving up isn't an option when someone depends on you for everything. You see him working one afternoon, building a cabinet. His movements are slow, deliberate. He measures 3 times before cutting once. Because his hands don't cooperate the way they used to. Because mistakes are expensive when you're working for money instead of community service. A younger man walks by, offers to help. Robert refuses. Pride? Or fear that accepting help means admitting he's not strong enough anymore? Probably both. By evening, he's exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that's bone deep. That's permanent. He collects his payment, goes home, prepares dinner, helps Ella eat, sits with her until she falls asleep. Then he collapses into bed knowing that tomorrow will be the same, and the day after that, year after year. No vacations, no breaks. No one comes to relieve him. No one offers to sit with Ella so he can rest. Because that's not how frontier communities work. You're family dependent. You don't burden your neighbours with your problems. Except Robert's neighbours benefited from him for 20 years. They ate food he gave them, planted crops from seed wheat he sacrificed, borrowed tools from his wife. And now, when he needs help, there's silence. Not cruelty, just silence. The way people respond when confronted with something they don't know how to handle, so he handles it alone. The house is small, 1 bedroom. He's moved a cot into the main room so he can sleep near Ella. So if she wakes in pain or gets sick or needs him, he can respond immediately. He hasn't slept in a bed beside his wife in 5 years. Hasn't had uninterrupted sleep in 7. His hair is completely white now. His face is carved by exhaustion. He looks 60, but he's only 55, and everyone in town can see what he's giving, what it's costing him, and nobody knows what to do about it, except remember. That's what people do when they can't help. They remember. They tell stories about what Robert and Ella used to be, the parties, the generosity, the way Ella laughed and Robert built things that outlasted him. But Ella isn't in those stories anymore. She's not part of the mythology of DeSmet's founding. She's become invisible, a footnote, the disabled wife, the burden, even though she's still here, still conscious, still feeling everything, still aware that the world has moved on without her. Listen to the silence in that small house, the absence of visitors, of children's laughter, of any sound except Robert's footsteps and Ella's laboured breathing, and the wind outside that carries memories of a life they used to live. But here's what people don't understand about Ella Boast. She's invisible to the community, but she's not invisible to herself. Her mind is still sharp. The arthritis destroyed her body but left her consciousness intact. And that's both a gift and a curse, because she's aware of everything. The way Robert's hands shake, the way he struggles to lift her, the way he's aging faster than he should, the way her own body is eating itself alive from the inside, and she's conscious of the isolation, the way neighbours don't visit anymore, the way people cross the street to avoid having to acknowledge her, the way she's become something other than human in the community's eyes, a problem to solve, a burden to pity, a cautionary tale about what happens when bodies break. But Ella refuses that narrative. You don't know this. Nobody really knows this, because she hides it behind that same bright smile she's worn since 1879. But on the days when you do visit, when you find the courage to stop instead of keep walking, you see glimpses of something unbroken. She asks you questions about your life, your family, your work. She listens to the answers. Actually listens. Not the half-focused listening of someone in pain. Real attention. Real interest in another human being. And in that moment, the disability disappears. She's not the woman in the wheelchair. She's Ella, the woman who knows how to make people feel seen. It's an act of extraordinary will every day. Because being seen requires energy she doesn't have, requires mustering enthusiasm she doesn't feel, requires pretending that sitting in a chair for 23 hours a day is acceptable, that losing the ability to care for her own body is something you adapt to, that life still has meaning when you can't participate in it. But she does it. For Robert. So he doesn't have to watch her fall apart. So he has at least one reason to believe this is worth it. That his sacrifice has value. That she's still worth saving. It's cruel, in a way, asking him to carry both his exhaustion and her pretend strength. But it's also love. The kind of love that protects even when protection means lying. Robert knows she's lying, and he lies back. They create this shared fiction where everything's fine, where this is manageable, where they can keep going indefinitely. And the fiction is what keeps them alive. Without it, they'd both collapse under the weight of reality. She has good days. Days when the pain recedes enough that she can focus on something other than survival. Days when she can look out the window and actually see the street instead of just staring at it. Days when she can remember who she was and hold on to that memory tight enough that it feels real. On those days, she talks about the parties, the children who used to fill her house, the coffee mill and the seed wheat, the generosity that Robert and she built their life around. She talks about it like it's happening now, like Neva Whaley is still 11 and hungry and desperate. Like Laura Ingalls is 12 and watching from the doorway, like the world still needs them. Robert listens to these stories, doesn't correct her, doesn't say, "That was 30 years ago," just lets her hold on to those memories because those memories are proof that their lives meant something, that they weren't just two people struggling to survive, that they built something. But on bad days, and there are increasingly more bad days, Ella can't pretend. The pain is too much. The exhaustion is too complete. The awareness of her own uselessness becomes too loud to ignore. On those days, she cries, not dramatically, just quiet tears while Robert sits beside her, helpless, unable to fix anything. He tries, offers laudanum again. She refuses again. She'd rather feel everything, the pain, the despair, the rage at a body that betrayed her, than float away on chemicals. Because if she's not feeling it, then who is she? If she can't be present in her own suffering, then what remains? It's a kind of heroism that goes unrecognized. This refusal to numb herself. This commitment to staying conscious in a situation that would justify any escape. It's a personal choice, a philosophical stance, a decision to maintain her humanity, even as the world treats her like a problem. You see her on the porch one spring morning, sitting in her wheelchair. Robert brought her out early because the weather was beautiful, and she asked to sit outside. The sun is warm, the trees are budding, the street is quiet. A child walks by, maybe 4 years old, doesn't know who Ella is, doesn't know about the parties or the seed wheat or the coffee mill. Just sees a woman in a wheelchair and does what children do. Stares. Ella smiles at her. The real smile, not the protective fiction. The genuine joy at being seen by someone innocent. The child waves. Ella waves back. And for a moment, the isolation breaks. Two people acknowledge each other, connected by nothing but human recognition. The child's mother pulls her away, embarrassed, worried that staring is rude, and the moment ends. But something happened in it. Some small exchange that mattered more than all the pity in the world. This is Ella's resistance, not dramatic, not rebellious, just showing up, being present, refusing to disappear even though disappearing would be easier. Robert is inside, cleaning, always cleaning, because cleaning is the one thing he can control. The house might fall apart, his body might fail. Ella's condition might deteriorate, but the floors can be clean, the dishes can be washed, order can be maintained in this small space. He's 58 now, grey, bent, moving like a man twice his age, but still working, still maintaining, still believing, or at least acting like he believes, that if he just keeps going, If he just keeps showing up, everything will somehow be okay. It won't be okay. He knows that. But knowing doesn't change the fact that he has to keep going anyway. Because stopping isn't an option. Because Ella needs him. Because this is what marriage looks like when you reach the end of it and realize there's nothing to do but endure. Listen to the sounds in that house. The footsteps, the creaking of the wheelchair, the wind outside, the absence of laughter. The quiet work of two people holding on to each other because letting go isn't possible. This is the invisible year, the decade that nobody talks about. Not dramatic enough for history, too painful for reminiscence, too ordinary for the stories that get told and retold about frontier pioneers. But it's real, and it matters. Because love isn't just the happy moments, it's also this, the staying, the showing up, the refusal to give up even when giving up would be so much easier. December 1918. The influenza pandemic is sweeping across America. Cities are quarantining. People are dying by the thousands. Masks are everywhere. Funerals are happening every day. The world is ending in slow motion. And in a small house in DeSmet's, South Dakota, Ella Boast is dying too. Not from influenza. From the disease that's been consuming her for 30 years, her body has finally used up its ability to endure. Robert sits beside her. She's 70 years old, he's 70, and after 49 years of marriage, he's watching the end arrive. She's not eating anymore, can't eat. Her body has forgotten how to swallow, how to process food, how to do anything except exist in diminishing increments. He offers water. She takes tiny sips. They run down her chin because her mouth doesn't seal properly anymore. Everything is falling apart. Everything is ending. You can feel it in the house. The way the air has changed. The way time has become finite. The way every moment is weighted with the knowledge that there won't be many more. Robert hasn't left her side in 3 days. Hasn't slept. Hasn't eaten much himself. Just sits. Holds her hand. Talks to her about nothing. About the weather. About the trees that are probably dormant now, waiting for spring that Ella won't see. She doesn't respond. Can't respond. But her hand squeezes his sometimes, small movements, signs that she's still there, still fighting, still holding on. On the 4th day, she lets go. It's quiet. There's no drama, no last words, no deathbed reconciliation or final wisdom, just breath that becomes less, and then stops, and then the absence of breath, and the understanding that 49 years of marriage has ended in a small room, in a small town during a pandemic that nobody will remember by next year. Ella Boast is dead. Robert sits with her body for an hour, holding her hand, not ready to let go, not ready for people to come and take her away, not ready for the world to move forward without her. Eventually someone comes, a neighbour, someone who heard, who came to help, who gently takes Ella's hand from Robert's, and Robert lets her go. The funeral is December 7th, 1918, a Friday. The church is half empty because of the pandemic. People are afraid of each other, afraid of death, afraid of the invisible illness that's killing thousands. So only the people who remember, the old families, the ones who were here when Ella first arrived, come to say goodbye. Never Whaley comes, now a woman, with grey in her hair, with children who'll never know the merry woman who saved her family with seed wheat. She cries, genuine tears, because she remembers, because she understands what she's lost. Laura Ingalls. Wilder doesn't come. She's somewhere else. Living somewhere else. Building a life somewhere else. But she'll remember. We'll write it down someday. We'll make sure that her childhood friend Ella, the woman who fed her when she was hungry, who opened her door, who represented kindness in a harsh world, isn't completely forgotten. The preacher says nice things about Ella's generosity, her warmth, her place in the community. The words are true but insufficient. No words could be sufficient for a life like hers, a life that was about presence, about showing up, about the quiet work of making people feel seen. Robert sits in the front pew, alone, his wife's coffin in front of him, and he's thinking, now what? They had no children, no grandchildren, no biological family to carry on. They had the community, had built a life around community. But now the community is uncertain what to do with Robert. With a widowed man in his 70s, with nothing to give, nothing to build, nothing to contribute except memory. After the funeral, he walks home. The house is empty in a way it wasn't before. Before it was full of Ella's presence, full of her breathing, her small movements, her existence in the chair. Now there's just empty space where she used to be. He sits in the dark, doesn't light the lamps, just sits, listening to the silence, to the wind outside, to the absence of the woman he's been caring for since 1889, since she first got sick, since the arthritis started and everything changed. 30 years. 30 years of caregiving. 30 years of lifting and helping and doing everything. 30 years of watching someone you love disappear. And then one moment it's over, and you're left with nothing but the weight of all those years and the emptiness of the room and the question, who am I now? Robert doesn't have an answer. The town grieves, not dramatically, not publicly, but genuinely, because people understood finally what Ella had meant to them, what her generosity had been worth, what they'd lost by not visiting, by not helping Robert, by not showing up when she needed them most. But grief doesn't change anything, doesn't bring her back, doesn't erase the years of isolation, doesn't fill the gap in the community that Ella's absence creates. Robert lives for almost 3 more years, just over 2.5. He maintains his routine, still does odd jobs, still keeps the house clean, still sits on the porch sometimes and watches the street. The trees he planted are towering now, full grown, providing the shade he imagined decades ago, shade he won't live to enjoy for long. People see him and feel guilt, the guilt of those who didn't help, who didn't visit, who let an old man carry an unbearable burden alone. The guilt is too much sometimes. So they look away, or they smile and say hello and keep walking. Robert doesn't blame them. He understands that disability is uncomfortable, that caring for someone who can't care for themselves challenges everything we believe about independence and productivity and value, that most people don't know how to respond to it, so they do nothing, which looks like abandonment but feels to them like the only option available. He dies on July 15th, 1921, a Wednesday. He's 73 years old. The funeral is smaller than Ella's, because Robert never had the gift of making people feel welcome the way Ella did. He was quiet, efficient, a man who built things and fixed things and showed up. But he didn't make connections the way his wife did. Still, people come, the old families, the ones who remember, who knew that Robert graded their roads and planted their shade trees and loaned seed wheat to their grandparents, who understood finally what he'd sacrificed, what his whole life had been about, building for a future that would outlive him, giving to a community that couldn't repay him. Both Robert and Ella are buried in DeSmet's cemetery, side by side. The headstones are simple, no great inscriptions, no poetry, just names and dates. Robert A.B. Boast, Ella Boast, married in 1869, died in 1818 and 1921. By summer of 1921, the trees Robert planted are so tall that the cemetery is shaded. The roads he graded are still maintained. The infrastructure he built is still functioning. The generosity he and Ella poured into this community is still there. Invisible, taken for granted, but there. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, someone walks past the cemetery and notices the graves, reads the names, and remembers, and understands that the most important people are often the ones history forgets, the quiet ones, the generous ones, the people who built shade for strangers and asked nothing in return. Spoiler, nobody builds a monument to Robert and Ella Boast. Nobody writes epic books about them. Nobody makes their story famous. They become footnotes in other people's narratives, mentioned in passing in Laura Ingalls Wilder's autobiography, referenced in pioneer girl archives, remembered by a handful of old people who eventually die themselves. But listen to this. Their story matters anyway, because it's about what real community looks like, not in the moment, but in the after, in what people build together, in what they leave behind, in the shade cast by trees planted by a man who knew he'd never sit under them, in the roads graded by hands that were already failing, in the generosity of two people who had no children to carry on their name, so they gave to the community instead. And the community, despite its failure to show up, despite its inadequate response to disability, despite its inability to repay what the Boast gave, still remembers. Somewhere in the infrastructure, in the memory, in the quiet understanding that the people who matter most are the ones who show up, who stay, who refuse to give up even when giving up would be justified. Robert and Ella Boast died more than 100 years ago, but their legacy, the roads, the trees, the example of what love looks like when everything else is stripped away, continues. Not because anyone made a big deal about it, but because quiet things last, because generosity compounds, because community is built one act of showing up at a time, and that's enough, for them, for anyone who understands what they were trying to build. July 15th, 1921. Robert Boast is buried. The town attends, or some of it does, the old families, the ones who remember, and then life moves on, because that's what people do. They grieve, they attend funerals, and then they move forward because standing still isn't an option. But something happens in the weeks after Robert dies, something quiet, something that doesn't make headlines in the Kingsbury County News, something that moves through the community like a current you can't see but can feel. People start talking about Ella, not Ella the disabled woman, not Ella the burden, but Ella, the one who gave, the one who mattered, the one who opened her doors and fed people and made them feel welcomed when the world was hard. Never Whaley Harding is an old woman now, 62 years old, grown children, grandchildren who'll never taste the whole wheat muffins that saved her family from starvation. But she remembers, sits in her living room and tells the story to anyone who'll listen. They gave us seed wheat when we had nothing, she says. Not a loan, a gift, and the coffee mill. They loaned us the coffee mill, because Ella understood. She understood what it meant to be hungry, to have children asking for food, to face a winter with nothing in your stores. The story travels, gets told again, and again, at church socials, at town meetings, at kitchen tables where women gather. The story of what Ella did, what she and Robert built together, what they meant. And the strange thing is, now that they're dead, people can finally see them clearly. Now that there's nothing to do but remember, the memory becomes precious. Never writes it down, actually writes it. In 1930, 9 years after Robert dies, she contributes to a local history publication. Daughter of Homesteader, she calls her essay. And she tells the whole story. The seed wheat, the coffee mill, the way the Boasts made survival possible. Not knowing so much about the beneficial qualities of whole wheat then as we do now, she writes, we were not so appreciative as we should have been. Appreciation delayed by 30 years. Recognition that arrives too late, but arrives anyway. Laura Ingalls Wilder is somewhere else. California, then Missouri, building a life away from the prairie. But she writes, always she writes, and she writes about her childhood, about the people who shaped it, about DeSmet and the families who lived there. She mentions Ella, in By the Shores of Silver Lake, in the long winter, in her more private writings that won't be published until long after she's dead. She writes about Ella Boast, the woman who was kind, the woman who welcomed, the woman whose disability became invisible in the written record but whose generosity never did. Laura understood something that the community at large was just beginning to grasp. People like Ella don't leave physical monuments. They don't build railroads or establish businesses or become town founders in the obvious way. They leave traces, in memory, in the people they touched, in the stories that get told and retold until they become part of the town's mythology. Ella becomes part of DeSmet's mythology. But notice this. Her story is told as a supporting narrative, the kind woman, the helpful neighbour, the merry hostess. Nobody says the hard part. Nobody talks about the 30 years of caregiving, the poverty, the isolation, the pain, the way Robert aged 10 years for everyone that passed. That version of the story is too uncomfortable, too much like contemporary life, too much like the way communities still fail people with disabilities. So the community tells the prettier version, the one where generosity matters, where hospitality is remembered, where love somehow is enough, and maybe in some way it is. Maybe what remains is the good part, the part that lasted, the part that mattered. The trees do remain. This is the concrete part of the legacy. Cottonwoods and ash and box elders that Robert planted in DeSmet's early years. Trees he would never sit under. Trees he knew would be harvested or survive long after his death. But trees he planted anyway. By 1921, these trees are massive, 40 years old, towering, creating real shade on Main Street. Creating real beauty in a town that was nothing but barren prairie when Robert arrived. Creating the visual landscape that DeSmet becomes known for. The prettiest stop on the railroad line, people call it, because of trees, because Robert Boast decided beauty mattered, even though he'd never personally benefit from it. You can walk through DeSmet today, 100 years later, and see some of those same trees. Different trees, perhaps, new generations. But the lineage is clear. The legacy of the original planting is visible. So Ella died in December 1918. Robert died 3 years later in July 1921, and within a decade their names are being written into local history. Not as major figures, not as famous pioneers, but as good people, as generous people. As the kind of quiet foundation that communities are built on. But here's the thing about legacies. They're never complete at the moment of death. They're always forming, always shifting, always being reinterpreted by whoever's doing the remembering. Here's something they don't teach you in history class. Memory is a kind of justice. When you remember someone, when you tell their story, when you pass it down, you're offering them a second life. A life that exists in the minds of people who never met them, a life that continues beyond death. But it's an incomplete justice, because the person you're remembering can't benefit from it, can't know that you're keeping their story alive, can't understand the weight of what they gave until they're no longer here to receive gratitude. Never Whaley Harding spends the rest of her life, and she lives another 16 years after writing that essay, telling the Boast story, to her children, to her grandchildren, to anyone who'll listen. She becomes the official keeper of this particular memory, the living connection between the present and that hard winter of 1881, the bridge between forgetting and remembering. She dies in 1946, and with her death, the direct personal connection to Ella dies too. There's no one left alive who ate food from Ella's table, no one left who was warmed by her hospitality, no one left who can say, I was there, I knew her, I saw what she did. But the story doesn't die with her, because stories are resilient that way. They adapt, they get passed down imperfectly, but they survive. Laura Ingalls. Wilder is more famous than Ella will ever be. Her books become beloved. Generations of children read about DeSmet and the pioneers and the hard winter, and scattered throughout those books are mentions of the Boasts, little Ella, Robert, the man who fixed things, the couple who seemed to young Laura to have their lives figured out. What Laura doesn't write about, what nobody writes about in her lifetime, is what comes after. The disease, the disability, the decades of caregiving. That story is too raw, too contemporary, too close to something that makes everyone uncomfortable, but it's still there, in the archives, in Never Whaley Harding's essay, in the Pioneer Girl project materials, in the memories of people who knew someone who knew someone who knew Ella. By the 1990s, scholars start digging into these connections, start trying to reconstruct who the real people were behind Laura's fictionalized accounts, and they find the Boasts, find Never Whaley Harding's essay, find the whole complicated story, and slowly, very slowly, the narrative starts to change. Ella is no longer just the merry woman. She becomes the disabled woman who wasn't erased despite her disability. Robert is no longer just the man who fixed things. He becomes the man who sacrificed everything for his wife. Their story stops being a footnote in Laura's biography and starts becoming its own narrative. But this resurrection of their story comes 150 years after they died. 150 years, long enough that it's historical, long enough that it's safe. Long enough that it can't challenge the living in immediate ways. Still, it matters. Because there are women reading this now, women in the 21st century, who are caregivers, who are exhausted, who are watching their own bodies fail, who are watching their partners age under the weight of caring for them. And when they read about Ella and Robert, something shifts. They see themselves. Not exactly. The time is different. The place is different. The diseases and the medicine are different. But the core truth, two people refusing to give up on each other, that's timeless. And they understand, reading about Ella, that their invisibility isn't new, that disabled women have always been erased from history, that their stories have always been hard to tell, that there's a tradition of quiet heroism that goes unrecognized, but also that it can be recognized. That memory is a form of resistance, that telling the story, even 100 years later, is a way of saying you mattered, what you did mattered, how you lived mattered. Listen to this. In the town of DeSmet, there's a cemetery. The Boasts are buried there, side by side. Their headstones are simple, no inscription except their names and dates, no grand statement about what they accomplished or who they were. But people visit them, tourists, descendants, scholars doing research, people who read about Laura Ingalls and wanted to see the places she knew. They walk through the cemetery and they find the Boast graves. They read the names, they stand there for a moment, and they remember, not because anyone told them to, not because there's a plaque explaining who these people were, but because the story exists now. Because Neva Whaley Harding wrote it down, because Laura Ingalls Wilder mentioned them, because historians found the connections, because the Prairie Girl Project materials made the story accessible. A cemetery visit becomes an act of remembrance, a quiet pilgrimage, a way of saying, I know who you were, I know what you did, it mattered. This is the legacy that survives, not the physical monuments that crumble, not the official recognition that's usually only granted to the famous, but the story, the persistent, resilient, beautiful story of two people who showed up for each other and for their community, and the insistence that this story be told, be remembered, be recognized as valuable. There's a woman in Riyadh right now, or Tokyo, or Sao Paulo, or anywhere in the world where people have access to the internet. And she's listening to a story about a woman from 140 years ago who got sick and whose husband cared for her, and they both died without seeing most of their dreams realized. And she's crying. Not because it's sad, though it is, but because it's familiar, because she recognizes herself, because she's exhausted or scared or both, and she needed to know that other women have carried this weight before her, that it's not new, that she's not alone. This is what the Boast's story does now. This is their second life. The life they couldn't have imagined when they were struggling through the hard winter of 1880. The life where their struggle becomes a bridge between past and present. Where their suffering becomes meaningful because it teaches someone else that they can survive it too. Robert and Ella Boast didn't get a happy ending, but they got a legacy. They got to matter. They got to continue in the hearts and minds of people they never met for generations after their death. And if that's not a form of immortality, it's close enough. There's a moment in every person's life when they realize that the most important things they do might never be recognized in their lifetime. That the work that matters most, the showing up, the staying, the refusing to give up, might go completely unseen, unappreciated, unrewarded, and then they have to decide, is it still worth doing? Robert and Ella Boast decided yes. Every single day for 40 years they decided yes. And now More than a century after their deaths, their decision is still teaching people something fundamental about what it means to be human. You can see it in the way DeSmet tells its own story now. The town has a historical society, museums dedicated to Laura Ingalls Wilder, walking tours that point out where the Ingalls family lived, where Pa's store was, where the school stood, and increasingly where the Boasts lived, where their homestead was, where they're buried. The Boasts aren't the main attraction. They'll never be the main attraction, but they're part of the narrative, part of the foundation story, part of what made DeSmet possible, and that inclusion matters. Because it says something true. Communities aren't built by heroes alone. They're built by ordinary people doing extraordinary things in ordinary circumstances, by women who loan coffee mills when flour is scarce, by men who plant trees they'll never sit under, by couples who stay together when leaving would be easier. The trees are still there, different trees now, probably, but descendants of the original planting, shade trees that Robert envisioned in 1880 when DeSmet was nothing but prairie grass and mud, when there was no reason to believe this place would become permanent, when investing in beauty was an act of faith. Those trees shade modern playgrounds, modern parks, modern streets where children walk to school, and nobody thinks about Robert Boast when they rest in that shade. But the shade exists because he planted it. The gift keeps giving even though the giver has been forgotten by most. Ella's gift is harder to measure. Hospitality doesn't leave physical monuments. Kindness doesn't create structures you can photograph. Generosity dissolves into the people it touches and becomes part of them, invisible, uncounted. But Neva Whaley Harding never forgot. And because she didn't forget, she wrote it down. And because she wrote it down, other women read it. And because other women read it, they understood something about their own mothers, their grandmothers, the women in their communities who give and give and give until there's nothing left, and whose giving is taken for granted until they're gone. Memory is a chain. You remember because someone before you remembered, and you write it down so someone after you can remember too. And suddenly, a woman who died in 1918 is still alive in the minds of women in 2026, still teaching, still mattering, still saying, "You're not alone. We've carried this weight before you. You can carry it too." There's a danger in telling stories like this, the danger of turning suffering into inspiration, of saying, "Look how much they endured. You can endure too." As if endurance is always noble, as if suffering is automatically meaningful, as if the point of Ella's story is to make you feel guilty for complaining about your own pain. That's not the point. The point is this: Ella suffered. Robert suffered. They didn't want to suffer. They would have given anything for a cure, for relief, for a different life. And when that different life didn't come, they made choices about how to live the life they had. Those choices mattered. Not because suffering is noble, but because love is. They loved each other. They loved their community. They loved the future, the abstract, unknowable future that would include shade trees and children and towns and people they'd never meet. And that love expressed itself in giving, in showing up, in refusing to give up even when giving up would be justified. That's what the story teaches. Not that you should suffer nobly, but that love can persist through circumstances that try to destroy it, and that persistence matters, even when nobody's watching, even when nobody thanks you, even when the only witness is your own conscience and the person you're caring for. Ella died without knowing that Neva Whaley would write an essay about her in 1930, without knowing that Laura Ingalls Wilder's books would become classics, without knowing that 150 years later scholars would research her life, that visitors would stand at her grave, that women on the other side of the world would hear her story and feel less alone. She died thinking she'd been forgotten, that her life had become small, that her contributions didn't matter because she couldn't contribute anymore in visible ways. She was wrong, but she couldn't know she was wrong. That's the tragedy. And also, somehow, the beauty. Because what it means is this: the things you're doing right now, the showing up, the staying, the refusing to give up on the people you love, those things matter, even if you never see the impact. Even if you die thinking you've been forgotten, even if the recognition comes 100 years too late. Memory is a gift that keeps arriving. Sometimes immediately, sometimes decades later, sometimes centuries later, but it arrives, and when it does, it transforms what looked like meaningless suffering into a legacy, into a bridge, into a story that connects women across time and space and circumstance. The sun sets over DeSmet the same way it did in 1879. The prairie grass still grows, the wind still blows, the winters are still hard, but the town remains, the trees remain, the roads remain, the infrastructure that Robert and Ella helped build. Not just the physical infrastructure, but the social infrastructure of generosity and showing up. That remains too. And somewhere, in a cemetery on the edge of town, 2 headstones mark the graves of people who mattered more than they ever knew, who gave more than they ever received, who built shade for strangers and asked nothing in return. Robert A.B. Boast, Ella Rosina Boast, born in the 1840s and 1850s, died in 1918 and 1921, married for 49 years, left no children, left no fortune, left no monument except the invisible kind, the kind that lasts. Listen. Can you hear it? The sound of women remembering, of women telling the story to other women, of women recognizing themselves in a woman who lived 140 years ago, of memory creating connections across time. That sound, that persistent, resilient sound, is the legacy, is the monument, is the proof that Robert and Ella Boast's decision to show up, to stay, to love through impossible circumstances mattered, still matters, will always matter, as long as there are women who need to know they're not alone in their exhaustion, as long as there are caregivers who need to know their invisible labour has value, as long as there are communities learning what it means to show up for each other, as long as there are people planting trees they'll never sit under. The story continues, the legacy grows, the gift keeps arriving, and Ella and Robert, wherever they are, finally get what they deserved all along: recognition, gratitude, the understanding that their lives, their ordinary, difficult, beautiful lives, were worth something, were worth everything. So the question becomes, what do we do with this story now that we know it? Because knowing about Robert and Ella Boast, their generosity, their suffering, their quiet heroism, that knowing creates a responsibility. It asks something of you, of everyone who hears it. It asks, what would you do in their situation? In any situation where you have to choose between protecting yourself and protecting someone else, between taking what you need and giving what others need more, between disappearing into your own pain and showing up despite it. These aren't hypothetical questions. They're the questions we're all answering every single day. Maybe not in circumstances as dramatic as frontier winters and rheumatoid arthritis, but in the small decisions that accumulate into a life, into a character, into a legacy. There's a woman right now, maybe you, sitting beside her mother's hospital bed, exhausted, financially strained, emotionally depleted, watching her mother disappear into dementia or cancer or any of the diseases that steal people incrementally, and she has a choice: stay or go, show up or step back. Sacrifice her own life to care for someone who can't care for themselves, or protect her own well-being. Neither choice is wrong. Both choices are understandable. But only one choice looks like Robert Boast. There's another woman, maybe also you, watching her marriage dissolve because caregiving is too hard. Because chronic illness doesn't just destroy the sick person's body. It destroys relationships, destroys finances, destroys the future you thought you'd have together. And she has to decide, is love enough? When everything else is gone, is love sufficient reason to stay? Ella and Robert said yes. For 49 years, they said yes. And it cost them everything. Their health, their financial security, their social life, their dreams of what old age would look like. Everything. Was it worth it? That's the question you're not supposed to ask, because the answer depends on what you value. If you value visible success, wealth, recognition, achievement, then no. Robert and Ella Boast's life wasn't worth it. They died poor. They died exhausted. They died having sacrificed everything and received almost nothing in return. But if you value something else, fidelity, presence, the quiet knowledge that you showed up when it mattered, then maybe yes, maybe their life was exactly what a life should be. Not comfortable, not easy, but meaningful. Lived in service of something larger than personal comfort. Hard times reveal who we are. That's what the frontier taught. That's what pandemics teach. That's what any crisis teaches. When resources are scarce, when survival is uncertain, when the comfortable structures of normal life collapse, you find out what people are really made of. Some people hoard, they protect their own. They calculate their odds and act accordingly. They prioritize their survival above all else. And honestly, that's rational. That's understandable. That's what most of us do most of the time. But some people give, even when giving costs them, even when they can't afford it, even when there's no guarantee it will matter. They give because that's who they are. Because generosity isn't contingent on having enough. Because showing up for others is its own reward even when the reward is invisible. Robert and Ella were the second kind of people. And 140 years after their story unfolded, women are still trying to figure out which kind of person they want to be. Still wrestling with the impossible math of caregiving, still exhausted, still wondering if their sacrifice matters, still looking for evidence that choosing love over self-protection is worth it. The Boasts don't make that choice easier, but they make it visible. They prove that choosing to stay, to give, to show up, that's not new. It's not unique to you. It's part of a tradition, a lineage of women and men who carried unbearable burdens because they decided that love was worth more than comfort. And maybe, that's what we inherit from them. Not a solution, not a guarantee that caregiving will be rewarded, but evidence. Evidence that it's possible, that people have done it before, that the weight you're carrying has been carried by others, that you're not alone. Here's what Ella and Robert Boast taught DeSmet. And here's what they're still teaching anyone who'll listen. First, community is built by what you give, not what you take. The Boasts gave seed wheat. They gave hospitality. They gave time and labour and resources they couldn't afford to lose, and that giving became the foundation that other people built their lives on. Never Whaley Harding planted crops from that seed wheat, fed her family, survived. And decades later, she remembered. She wrote it down. She made sure the story didn't die. That's how community works. Someone gives, someone else receives, and the receiving creates a debt that gets repaid not to the giver, but to the next person who needs it. Generosity becomes cyclical, becomes self-perpetuating, becomes the infrastructure that holds everything together when everything else is falling apart. Second, invisible work matters. Ella spent 30 years in a chair, unable to walk, unable to care for herself, unable to contribute in any of the ways that society values, and the community forgot her, or tried to. Because disability is uncomfortable. Because watching someone suffer makes us feel helpless. Because we don't know how to value people who can't produce. But Ella was still there, still conscious, still loving Robert, still holding on to her humanity in circumstances that would have justified giving up. And Robert saw her, valued her, cared for her, not because she could give him anything in return, but because she was his wife, because their marriage vows meant something, because love isn't transactional. That invisible work, the staying, the caring, the showing up, that's what women have been doing for millennia. Caring for children who can't care for themselves, caring for elderly parents, caring for disabled partners, caring for communities, and getting almost no recognition for it, almost no payment, almost no gratitude until decades after they're dead. But it still matters. The fact that it's invisible doesn't make it less valuable. The fact that it's unpaid doesn't make it less essential. The fact that it's exhausting doesn't make it less heroic. Ella Boast's life is proof of that. She couldn't walk. But she taught Neva Whaley Harding what generosity looks like. She couldn't contribute economically, but she showed her community what it means to endure with dignity. She couldn't build physical monuments, but she built something better, a legacy of presence, of staying, of refusing to disappear even when disappearing would be easier. Third, you don't get to see the impact of your choices in real time. Robert planted trees in 1880, died in 1921. The trees are still standing, still providing shade, still beautifying DeSmet, but Robert never sat under them at their full height, never saw them become what he envisioned. He planted them anyway, because the work mattered more than the reward, because building for a future you won't see is what responsible adults do. Because generosity isn't about personal benefit, it's about legacy. You're probably doing the same thing right now, raising children who won't appreciate your sacrifices until they're parents themselves, caring for aging parents who might never be able to thank you, working jobs that won't remember you after you retire, building communities that will take your contributions for granted. And it feels thankless. It is thankless most of the time. But the Boasts are proof that impact happens anyway, that recognition arrives eventually, that the work you're doing matters even if you never see the results, even if you die thinking you've been forgotten, even if the gratitude comes 100 years too late. The trees are still standing, the story is still being told, the legacy continues. Your work, the invisible, exhausting, unappreciated work you're doing right now, that's building something too. You might not see it, might never see it, but it's there, growing, becoming something that will outlast you. That's what we inherit from Robert and Ella Boast. Not instructions, not answers, but evidence that the work matters. That love is sufficient reason to stay, that generosity compounds across generations, that you don't have to be famous or wealthy or successful to leave a legacy worth having. You just have to show up, stay, give what you can, refuse to give up. That's enough. For them, for you, for anyone. But here's something interesting, something you need to know before this story ends. While Robert and Ella Boast were giving away their seed wheat, sacrificing their own survival to feed their neighbours, other people in DeSmet were making different choices. There was a merchant, a store owner, a man who saw that same hard winter, that same starvation, that same desperate need for wheat. And he saw something else. Opportunity. His name was Daniel Loftus, and when wheat became scarce, when families were hungry, when survival depended on access to grain, he made a calculation. He owned wheat. People needed wheat. Supply and demand. Basic economics. So he set his prices. And families who couldn't afford those prices went hungry. Or they found wheat elsewhere. Or they borrowed from neighbours like the Boasts who couldn't afford to give but gave anyway. The community remembered this too. Not with the same affection they remembered Ella's coffee mill, but they remembered, wrote it down, passed it along. Daniel Loftus became part of DeSmet's mythology too, a different kind of story, a cautionary tale about what happens when you choose profit over people, when you see crisis as opportunity, when you value your own survival more than your neighbours. Laura Ingalls. Wilder wrote about him, not kindly. The story of how Almanza Wilder and Cap Garland risked their lives to find wheat during that terrible winter, and then Daniel Loftus tried to profit from their heroism, that story became famous, became part of the Little House legend, became the example of everything the frontier wasn't supposed to be about. Two kinds of people. Robert and Ella Boast on one side, Daniel Loftus on the other, generosity versus greed, community versus self-interest, giving versus taking. Both choices are understandable, both are rational in their own way, but only one builds community, only one creates legacy worth having, only one gets remembered with gratitude. And here's the question that's been hanging over this entire story. What happened to Daniel Loftus? Did his profit matter? Did he die wealthy while the Boasts died poor? Did he get away with it? Or did the community exact some kind of justice? That's a different story, a darker story, A story about what happens when you choose wrong in hard times, when you prioritize wealth over relationships, when you forget that community is built on trust, and trust once broken doesn't repair easily. But it's a story that needs to be told, because you can't fully understand what Robert and Ella Boast chose without understanding what Daniel Loftus chose. You can't appreciate generosity without understanding greed. You can't value community without seeing what destroys it. So next time, we'll talk about Daniel Loftus, the merchant who saw starvation and saw profit. The man who tried to price gouge his neighbours during DeSmet's worst winter. The other side of the frontier story. The part that doesn't fit the mythology. The part that's messier, more complicated, more human. We'll talk about what he did, what the community did in response, what happened to his business, his reputation, his legacy. We'll talk about the cost of choosing wrong. Because if Robert and Ella Boast teach us what love looks like when everything else is gone, then Daniel Loftus teaches us what happens when love is missing entirely, when calculation replaces compassion, when profit replaces presence. Both lessons matter. Both stories need to be told. But for now, remember this. You're making the same choice Robert and Ella made. Every day, in small ways and large, you're deciding whether to give or take, whether to show up or step back, whether to build shade for strangers or protect your own comfort. And your choice matters, not because anyone's watching. Not because you'll be remembered, but because community is built one choice at a time, one act of generosity at a time, one decision to stay instead of leave. Robert and Ella Boast chose to give, chose to stay, chose to love through circumstances that justified giving up. And 140 years later, we're still talking about them, still learning from them, still trying to figure out if we have the courage to make the same choice. Do you? That's the question their story asks, and it's the question only you can answer. Next time on this channel, Daniel Loftus, the merchant who profited from DeSmet's starvation winter. While the Boasts gave their seed wheat away, one man saw opportunity in crisis. What happened when he tried to price gouge his starving neighbours? And what did the community do about it? The story of greed, survival and frontier justice, coming soon.